The family of Meshay Melendez and Layla Stewart getting some level of justice tonight as the man who murdered them is sentenced to life in prison. Good evening. Thanks a lot for joining us, everybody. I'm Steve Dunn.
In the early days of March 2023, a mother and her 7-year-old daughter walked into a home in Vancouver, Washington, and vanished. It wasn't just any home. It belonged to a man Meshay Melendez had spent years trying to distance herself from. A man whose presence, even in silence, stirred unease. By all accounts, it was supposed to be a short visit, a conversation, maybe closure. But after that night, no one heard from her again. Calls went unanswered. Messages left unread. For Meshay's family, that silence wasn't just unusual, it was terrifying.
Our family has been torn apart by grief and the endless questions that haunt us every day.
Days passed with no trace of her or little Layla. Her mother, desperate and exhausted, reached out to authorities. They began searching, asking questions. The more they learned, the more it pointed to the one man everyone had hoped she was done with. Then, the discovery. Along a remote stretch of road, 2 bodies were found. They weren't hidden, they weren't buried, they were displayed. A mother and daughter, placed side by side like lifeless props. Discarded, stripped of dignity. That image alone haunted the town. But the horror didn't end there. What investigators found next left even the most seasoned officers stunned, not just by the brutality of the crime, but by the deeper story buried beneath it. A history of threats, of violence, of warning signs missed or ignored, and one chilling detail no one could have expected involving young Layla. One that changed the nature of this case entirely. This wasn't just about a murder, this was about something far more disturbing. So how did a simple visit turn into a double tragedy? Why were signs overlooked? And what secrets did Meshay take with her into that house? We're about to tell you a story of betrayal, manipulation, and the kind of loss that leaves scars across generations. But first, please let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Your voice helps us build a global community that cares about justice and awareness. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Meshay Melendez was a 27-year-old mother who, despite the obstacles life threw her way, was fiercely devoted to her daughter, Layla Stewart. To the outside world, Meshay appeared to be a young woman with her whole life ahead of her. She worked hard to provide for Layla, always dreaming of a brighter future where she could finally leave behind the pain and chaos of her past. Meshay's world revolved around her daughter, the little girl who brought light and laughter into her life, despite their struggles. They were a team, facing the challenges of life together. Meshay was determined to give Layla everything she could, a better life than the one she had known. Layla, only 7 years old, was a joyful, curious child who had a warmth that could melt even the coldest of hearts. Her infectious laugh, her endless energy, and her ability to make friends wherever she went made her loved by everyone who met her. Layla had a special bond with her mother, and it was clear to anyone who saw them together that the two shared an unbreakable connection. Meshay was Layla's protector, and Layla, in return, was the motivation behind her mother's every decision. Every choice Meshay made was with Layla in mind, always striving to build a better future, to make sure her little girl had a chance at a life of happiness and opportunity. But life wasn't always kind to Meshay and Layla. They faced hardships, financial struggles, instability, and, most importantly, the toxic shadow of Meshay's past. The most significant presence in their lives, however, was Meshay's ex, Kirkland Warren, a man whose influence over them would lead to a heartbreaking tragedy. Warren was not Layla's father, but his toxic presence in their lives was undeniable. Meshay had met Warren years earlier, and at first he seemed charming, caring, and attentive. But over time, his true nature began to emerge, revealing a man who was manipulative, controlling, and, at times, violent. Though Meshay did her best to move on from him, Warren never really disappeared. He remained a constant in their lives, whether through his attempts to manipulate her, the way he would show up uninvited, or the threats he would make. The tension between Warren and Meshay was palpable, with family and friends often noticing how unsettling their interactions could be. Warren's jealousy and possessiveness over Meshay were unmistakable, and it became clear that, despite her desire to leave him in the past, he would not let her go so easily. Meshay had finally begun to move on, creating a life for herself and Layla, but Warren was always lurking in the background, a reminder of the past she couldn't fully escape. For Layla, life with her mother should have been filled with joy, but the dark presence of Warren's influence over her mother's life meant that peace was often fleeting. Meshay did her best to shield her daughter from the tension, but the shadow of Warren's control would occasionally rear its head, disrupting their lives in painful ways. Meshay longed for a fresh start, a chance to build a stable life away from the weight of her past. She dreamed of a future where she could watch Layla grow up without the fear of toxic relationships overshadowing their happiness. But as fate would have it, that dream would be cut tragically short. Have you ever witnessed a relationship like this? What are your thoughts on toxic exes and their impact on families? Share below. March 12, 2023 began like any other Sunday morning, with promises of a quiet day, nothing to suggest that the day would end in tragedy, or that the lives of Meshay Melendez and Layla Stewart would be irrevocably altered in the hours to come. Meshay had made plans. She had a list of things to do, the usual mix of errands, maybe even a little time to unwind with her daughter before the week began. But the events of this day weren't planned. They would unfold in ways that no one, least of all Meshay, could have anticipated. It was around noon when Meshay and Layla left their home to visit Kirkland Warren, a man whose presence in their lives had always been complicated, charged with tension and unresolved anger. Despite not being Layla's biological father, Warren had once been involved in Meshay's life in a far more significant way. And now, even after their relationship had ended, he remained a fixture. He was a father figure to Layla, though their bond was fraught with the weight of past volatility. Meshay, despite the history, had made the decision to let Layla visit him on this day. It was a decision that would ultimately prove to be one of the last. They arrived at his house. The air, for a moment, was calm. But those closest to Meshay had long known that interactions with Warren were unpredictable, often swinging between false civility and simmering tension. There were no witnesses to what transpired behind closed doors, but whatever happened in that house set off a chain of events that would leave everyone asking the same question: what went wrong? According to initial reports, Meshay and Layla were seen leaving Warren's house late in the afternoon. They appeared calm, perhaps even normal. Nothing out of the ordinary. No signs of distress, no indication that their visit had gone awry. But that would be the last time anyone saw them. The hours ticked by, and Meshay failed to respond to messages or calls. Family members who were accustomed to regular check-ins began to feel the first stirrings of concern. But still, there was no reason to panic, not yet. Life had a way of pulling people in different directions. Maybe they'd gotten caught up in something. But by evening, the worry became undeniable. The hours stretched longer. Meshay hadn't shown up, nor had she called back. Layla, always so eager to talk, was silent. Concern turned to confusion. Was something wrong? Family members reached out to Warren, but his responses were unclear. He seemed calm, almost too calm. He told them he hadn't seen Meshay or Layla since they left his house, despite the fact that he had been the last known person to have contact with them. It didn't sit right. The suspicion was immediate. Warren's history with Meshay wasn't just filled with disputes. It was marked by violence. There were previous restraining orders, troubling outbursts, and countless other red flags. Could he have done something? But without proof, without any concrete evidence, there was only uncertainty.
I did write, and they said that while no amount of prison time will bring back Meshay Melendez and her daughter Layla Stewart, they are grateful that Kirkland Warren will spend the rest of his life behind
The situation,
bars.
however, grew more unsettling as time wore on. By the next morning, there were no signs of Meshay and Layla. Their phones were off. No one had heard from them. That wasn't like them. Not at all. As the hours passed, the worry escalated. There was no way to ignore the creeping sense that something had gone terribly wrong. This wasn't just another one of those misunderstandings or missed calls. This felt different. And the more time that passed, the more certain it became that their disappearance wasn't as simple as it seemed. Warren's refusal to offer much in the way of help, combined with his past, only deepened suspicions. What was he hiding? Why couldn't he provide any clarity about what had happened to Meshay and Layla once they left his home? Family members began to take action. They contacted local authorities. They called friends, neighbors, anyone who might have seen something. But as the hours slipped into days, it became clear that this wasn't just a case of someone being late. This was the beginning of a nightmare that no one had been prepared for. What would you do if you couldn't get a hold of your loved ones and feared for their safety? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. The days following the disappearance of Meshay Melendez and her daughter Layla Stewart were a blur of frantic activity, escalating anxiety, and growing desperation. Authorities, family members, and community members alike all mobilized, determined to find the missing pair. But as each hour passed without word, the sense of dread intensified. What began as a missing persons case soon turned into an agonizing waiting game, with no one sure of what had happened to them, but everyone fearing the worst. In the early hours after their disappearance, Meshay's family did everything they could to assist in the search. Layla's grandmother, along with other loved ones, posted pleas for information online, circulated photographs, and spread word of their disappearance throughout the local area. Every phone call, every new lead felt like a false hope until it turned into a dead end. Local news outlets began covering the case with interviews from Meshay's family, who described the young mother's hope for a fresh start and the bond she shared with her daughter. "She was just trying to rebuild her life," said Layla's aunt, her voice shaking with emotion. "She didn't deserve this. Neither of them did." Authorities did their part as well, interviewing friends, family, and acquaintances to build a timeline of the days leading up to their disappearance. Officers canvassed the area, looking for any security footage or other evidence that might offer clues. Yet, despite their efforts, no solid leads emerged. As the days passed, the fear within the community grew. A sense of unease spread among the residents who had once greeted each other with friendly smiles on the street, but now looked over their shoulders, wondering if something much darker was happening in their midst. The public's worry was palpable. Meshay and Layla had been a vibrant presence in the community, and their sudden absence left a void. Local businesses posted missing person flyers in their windows, and many organized search parties to cover nearby parks, fields, and streets, hoping to find anything that could point to their location. Yet for all the community's efforts, the search turned into a quiet nightmare. Layla's classmates asked their teachers daily when the two would be back, and each unanswered question added another layer of anguish to an already heartbroken family. As authorities continued their search, Kirkland Warren remained a focal point of suspicion. He had been the last person to see Meshay and Layla, but instead of offering clear answers, he gave conflicting and evasive statements. At times, he seemed too calm, almost detached, in the face of his ex-girlfriend's disappearance and the vanishing of a young girl he had known since her birth. One of the most jarring moments occurred when Warren was interviewed by the press. Despite the growing desperation in the search, Warren stated, "I don't know where they are. I just don't." His words lacked conviction, and his demeanor made those who were watching uneasy. His reluctance to offer any new information, coupled with his refusal to cooperate fully with investigators, made him a key figure in the case. Warren's refusal to acknowledge the severity of the situation, even when asked about the mother-daughter duo's safety, only raised more red flags. Many in the community noticed his erratic behavior. Some said his demeanor had shifted in the days following their disappearance. He seemed oddly quiet at times, almost as though he had a secret to hide, yet would not break his silence. This behavior did little to ease the mounting suspicions that Warren had something to do with their vanishing. The search continued, but the growing worry was undeniable. As each hour passed, the possibility of a happy reunion slipped further away. Meshay's family was left clinging to hope, but even the most optimistic could not ignore the grim reality. Their fear intensified as they struggled to believe that Warren's involvement could truly be a coincidence. Then, on the 10th day of the search, a breakthrough came, though it was not what anyone had hoped for. How do you feel about Warren's actions during the search? Was he acting strange, or was it just the stress of the situation? Let us know in the comments below. What would you have done in his shoes? It was a cold morning, the kind where the fog seems to hang heavier than usual in the air, and everything feels eerily still. A local passerby, walking along a secluded stretch of road not far from the town, made a discovery that would change everything. What seemed like an ordinary day quickly turned into a horrifying nightmare. The sight of Meshay Melendez and Layla Stewart lying on the side of the road was one no one in the community would ever forget. At first glance, the bodies appeared to be staged, as if someone had carefully arranged them. Meshay was found lying on her back, her body positioned near Layla, who was sprawled out beside her. The two victims appeared to be placed in an unnatural, almost deliberate pose. They weren't just discarded carelessly, they were positioned in such a way that suggested intent, as if the killer wanted them to be seen. The unsettling reality began to set in. This wasn't a simple crime, it was a calculated act, one that would leave an indelible mark on the minds of those who came across it. The bodies of Meshay and Layla were found just a short distance from a nearby dirt road, an area that had previously been searched and deemed clear by authorities. The positioning of the bodies raised an immediate sense of dread. Why had they been placed there? And why had their bodies been treated like this? As investigators arrived on the scene, the full horror of the discovery became clear. Meshay and Layla had been shot execution style, their lives taken with a level of brutality that left little room for doubt. For Meshay, the shots had been fired at close range, targeting the head. Layla, just 7 years old, had endured the same fate. The manner in which they had been executed left authorities stunned. But there was something even more chilling about the scene, something that would haunt everyone involved for years to come. Layla's body, in particular, revealed the full extent of the crime's disturbing nature. It was found half-naked from her waist down, and during the autopsy, it was revealed that Layla had been sexually assaulted before she was shot. The discovery of this violation shook the investigators and the entire community to its core. A young girl, innocent and full of life, had suffered in ways too horrific to comprehend. The revelation left everyone who knew her in complete disbelief. She was meant to be enjoying her childhood, not facing such a brutal and unimaginable fate. But the tragedy of Meshay's and Layla's deaths wasn't just about the shocking violence. It was also about the deep sense of betrayal felt by those who had loved them. The investigation quickly turned its focus to Kirkland Warren, Meshay's ex-boyfriend, and the last person known to have seen them alive. Warren had a history of violent behavior, with previous allegations of aggression and threats. Though he wasn't Layla's biological father, his relationship with Meshay and his connection to the family placed him firmly in the center of the investigation. His statements about the events surrounding their disappearance had been contradictory, inconsistent, and strangely detached, further fueling suspicions that he had more to do with the crime than he was letting on. Authorities began to piece together his movements, and it quickly became clear that Warren's alibi was flimsy at best. His denials and his reluctance to cooperate fully with investigators were now seen as red flags. In the days leading up to the discovery of the bodies, Warren's behavior had already drawn attention for its suspicious nature. Yet, it was the shocking discovery of Meshay and Layla that truly solidified him as the prime suspect in their deaths. The investigation into Warren's background unearthed troubling details. He had a history of domestic violence and had been involved in several altercations with Meshay in the past. Though he had claimed to be helping in the search, his actions and words seemed more self-serving than genuinely concerned. The more authorities dug into his history, the more it became clear. Warren was not just a bystander in this case, he was the central figure in this tragedy. As the days passed, investigators started to piece together the disturbing pattern of events. The discovery of the bodies had confirmed the worst fears. The lives of Meshay and Layla had been stolen in the most brutal and heart-wrenching way. The brutality of the crime and the way the bodies had been positioned indicated that Warren had orchestrated the deaths of both mother and daughter in a cold, calculated manner. The chilling nature of the crime scene painted a picture of someone who was not only capable of violence, but also someone who wanted to send a message. The posed bodies, the close-range shots, and the senseless violation of Layla made it clear that this was not a random act of violence. It was an act of malice, premeditated and driven by a twisted sense of control. Meshay and Layla had been the victims of someone who felt entitled to their lives, someone whose anger and bitterness had exploded in the most horrific way. As the investigation continued to unfold, the reality of what had happened became clearer. Warren's past actions, his statements, and the growing evidence pointed toward him as the killer. But what motivated such a cold and calculated crime? Was it the end of his volatile relationship with Meshay? Or was there something more sinister at play? The community, still reeling from the discovery, could only watch in horror as the investigation closed in on Warren. What's your reaction to the way the bodies were posed? Does it change the way you see the case? Let me know what you think in the comments. As investigators combed through the crime scene where Meshay Melendez and her 7-year-old daughter, Layla Stewart, were found, the focus sharpened quickly onto one individual, Kirkland Warren, the last person known to have seen them alive, and someone with a deeply troubling past. What started as suspicions based on behavior and history would soon evolve into a case bolstered by hard, indisputable evidence. One of the most damning revelations in the investigation came in the form of DNA evidence. Forensic experts worked swiftly to process samples gathered from both the crime scene and the victims' bodies. The tests revealed Kirkland Warren's DNA, linking him directly to the crime. His DNA was not only found near Meshay's body, but was also detected on Layla, a fact that sent shivers down the spines of investigators and confirmed their worst fears about what had occurred in the final hours of the mother and daughter's lives. The sexual assault on Layla was no longer a grim suspicion, it was now a forensic certainty. And the presence of Warren's DNA left no room for reasonable doubt. His involvement had moved from circumstantial to concrete, as the forensic trail pointed directly to him. With this pivotal discovery, law enforcement moved in. On March 19, 2023, Warren was arrested. The weight of the investigation had finally caught up to him. Detectives had already been closely monitoring his behavior in the days following the disappearance. His statements were inconsistent, evasive, and at times emotionally detached, raising red flags for investigators. He had shown little urgency or concern, a chilling contrast to the growing desperation of Meshay's family and the community at large. During his interrogation, Warren's demeanor wavered between cold and calculated. He initially denied involvement, sticking to a story that he had last seen Meshay and Layla leaving his home alive. But the facts didn't align. Surveillance footage contradicted his timeline. Phone records and location data placed him in areas critical to the investigation during windows of time he claimed to be elsewhere. But what truly turned the tide was the combination of digital evidence and DNA. Cell phone pings, matched with forensic results, placed Warren at the scene where the bodies were later discovered. Law enforcement now had the pieces they needed: the motive, the opportunity, and the physical evidence. Warren was charged with 2 counts of murder, along with charges related to the sexual assault of Layla and improper disposal of the bodies. The case against him was strengthening by the day. But it was also not the first time Kirkland Warren had shown violent behavior. In fact, his criminal history told a story that, in hindsight, felt tragically predictive. Warren had previously been charged with domestic violence against Meshay, including an incident where he allegedly choked her, a terrifying event that nearly claimed her life. And yet, despite the severity of that attack, the legal system allowed him to remain free while pending trial. It would later come to light that Warren had even violated a protection order that Meshay had sought to keep him away, an order that, sadly, was not enough to shield her and her daughter from the violence that would follow. Digging deeper, investigators uncovered that Warren's history of violence extended beyond just his relationship with Meshay. He was previously involved in a fatal shooting in his home state of Arkansas and was out on bond for that very charge while residing in Washington. That's right, Warren had been accused of murder before, and yet he was allowed to walk free in another state where he would go on to allegedly take 2 more lives. The pattern of escalating violence was unmistakable, and the realization that Layla's life may have been spared had earlier warnings been taken more seriously left a bitter sense of injustice hanging over the community. This was not a man who had suddenly snapped. This was someone with a documented trail of aggression, manipulation, and cruelty, and the legal system had failed to recognize just how dangerous he truly was. As the case moved toward trial, prosecutors worked to compile every ounce of evidence against Warren, determined to ensure justice for Meshay and Layla. The DNA, the phone records, the video surveillance, all of it painted the same picture. A man with a history of violence, given too many chances, who finally committed an act so horrific it shocked even the most seasoned investigators. But what if Warren's violent past wasn't just a string of disconnected events? What if this case revealed a larger, systemic failure to hold dangerous individuals accountable before it's too late? Do you think DNA evidence is always enough to convict someone? Or is there more to the story? Share your opinion below. The brutal murders of Meshay Melendez and her 7-year-old daughter Layla Stewart didn't just end 2 lives. They tore a permanent hole in the hearts of an entire family. For those closest to them, especially Meshay's mother and Layla's grandmother, the aftermath has been a waking nightmare. Their grief is raw, their pain is deep, and their questions still hauntingly unanswered.
Who were brutally murdered and sodomized by a monster, a soulless being put on this planet, a narcissist.
When Meshay and Layla were first reported missing, the family hoped, desperately, that maybe they were just out of reach. Maybe their phones had died. Maybe they'd taken an impromptu trip, or just needed space. But as the hours turned into days and then into a week, hope began to crumble under the weight of reality. Meshay's mother, who had helped raise Layla, and stood as both a parent and a best friend to her daughter, spoke out publicly. Her voice, shaking with devastation, painted a heartbreaking picture of the days spent not knowing. She recalled waking up each morning and instinctively checking her phone, hoping for a message, a missed call, anything that would prove this was all just a bad dream. We didn't want to believe it. Even when things weren't adding up, we kept praying. But deep down, I think we already knew something was terribly wrong. And for Layla's aunts and cousins, the pain has been just as profound. They remembered Layla not just as a child, but as the light in every room. A little girl who danced like no one was watching, who told silly jokes, and who clung to her mother with the kind of unconditional love only a child can give. Her death shattered more than just hearts. It fractured the sense of safety in a family already familiar with hardship. One of Layla's aunts described the surreal experience of packing up Layla's belongings after the funeral. Her shoes, her drawings, the stuffed animals she used to carry everywhere, they were no longer symbols of her joy, but painful reminders of the life that was stolen from them. There's nothing that prepares you to see your niece's favorite teddy bear in a box. Nothing that helps you understand why someone would do this. Will never be the same. And as for Meshay's siblings, their grief is tangled with guilt. Some wondered if they could have done more. Others replayed old conversations, grasping for signs they might have missed. Warren's past behavior had always concerned them, but they never imagined it would lead to this. The realization that Meshay had tried to break free from him, and that her attempt to move on was what likely sealed her fate, has only deepened the pain. But perhaps the most agonizing part of it all was the waiting. Those painful days between the disappearance and the discovery. During that time, every knock on the door, every call from a detective, every news alert felt like a punch to the gut. Meshay's mother said it was like being trapped in a loop of panic and helplessness, each hour confirming the fear that something unspeakable had happened. You never expect to bury your child, and you never, ever expect to bury your grandchild. This wasn't supposed to happen, not like this. And through it all, one emotion continues to rise above the grief: anger. The family is furious at Warren, not only for what he did, but for the signs that were missed, the red flags ignored, the system that failed to stop him. They're angry that Meshay's pleas for protection weren't taken more seriously, that someone with such a violent past was walking free, and that Layla, an innocent child, paid the ultimate price. He knew what he was doing. He took our girls from us, and now we have to live with that for the rest of our lives. But the family's fight doesn't end here. Their grief is now pushing them towards something bigger, a search for justice and a demand for answers that might finally explain why this tragedy was allowed to happen at all. What are your thoughts on the impact of violence on families? Can anything truly prepare you for such a loss? The courtroom was silent as Kirkland Warren stood before the judge, expressionless, unmoved, and unflinching, as the charges against him were read aloud. Double homicide, aggravated sexual assault, use of a firearm in the commission of a felony.
Thanks so much for joining us for KT News at 4. I'm Deborah Knapp.
And I'm Rick Asway. The mother and daughter were found dead in rural Clark County in March 2023. Police arrested Warren the same month and eventually charged him.
The weight of his crimes echoed through the chamber like a slow drumbeat of horror. And in the benches behind him, Meshay Melendez and Layla Stewart's family sat gripped in a state of heartbreak and fury, waiting for justice that felt long overdue. From the moment Warren was arrested, the eyes of the community and the nation were fixed on this case. Prosecutors painted a picture of a man with a disturbing and violent history, a ticking time bomb who had finally detonated. They presented DNA evidence linking Warren to the murder scene, alongside surveillance footage, witness testimony, and a damning timeline that unraveled any hope of plausible deniability. Warren's defense attempted to cast doubt. His attorneys floated the theory that someone else may have been responsible, trying to lean into Warren's cool demeanor as a sign of innocence, not guilt. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the inconsistencies in Warren's own statements only made his guilt more evident. The prosecution didn't just present facts, they presented pain. They played audio from 911 calls, showed images from the crime scene, and read aloud excerpts from Meshay's text messages in the days leading up to her death. Messages filled with fear, worry, desperation. "If something happens to me," Meshay had once written to a friend, "he did it." Those words echoed in the courtroom like a prophecy fulfilled. Then came the emotional statements from the family, perhaps the most unforgettable part of the entire trial. Meshay's mother took the stand during the victim impact portion, her voice trembling but resolute. She spoke not only as a grieving mother, but as a grandmother who now had to live without the bright, loving child who once ran barefoot through her home. "Layla was just a baby," she cried. "She didn't even get the chance to grow up. She didn't deserve this. Neither did my daughter." One by one, family members rose to speak. Each statement was a gut punch. Some could barely form the words through their tears. Others spoke with anger, staring directly at Warren with fire in their eyes, daring him to look back. The jury deliberated, but not for long. The verdict, guilty on all counts. When the judge read the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole, there were gasps in the courtroom. Some wept with relief, others with grief. There were no cheers, no victory, only a quiet acknowledgement that a small measure of justice had been served. The judge didn't mince words during sentencing. He called the crime a cold, calculated act of evil, emphasizing that the brutality of the murders, particularly the assault on a child, demanded the harshest sentence allowed by law. "You took not one but 2 lives," the judge said, staring down at Warren. "And you did so with intent, with cruelty, and with no regard for the suffering left behind. This court has no mercy for you." But even with the verdict and sentence, the pain didn't end. For the family, the trial brought closure, but not healing. In a statement released outside the courthouse, Meshay's mother said, "There's no such thing as justice when your daughter and granddaughter are in the ground, but we can breathe a little easier knowing he'll never hurt anyone else again." The family now plans to honor Meshay and Layla's memory, not just through mourning, but through action, launching a foundation to support victims of domestic violence and raise awareness about the silent warning signs they wish they had seen sooner. Do you feel the sentence was just, or is there still more to be done for justice? Let us know in the comments. In the aftermath of any tragedy, we are left not only with sorrow, but with questions. How did this happen? Could it have been prevented? What signs were missed? As we reflect on the heartbreaking story of Meshay Melendez and her young daughter, Layla Stewart, these questions cut deep. Meshay's story is one that's become far too familiar. A woman trying to move on from a toxic, abusive relationship while doing everything she could to protect her child and build a better life. But even as she tried to distance herself from Kirkland Warren, the hold he had over her was deeply rooted in fear, intimidation, and manipulation. This case is a devastating reminder of how toxic relationships can spiral into fatal violence, especially when red flags are ignored, dismissed, or downplayed by those around them. Warren had a well-documented history of violence, not only toward Meshay, but in previous incidents. He had already shown what he was capable of. But the system failed to intervene meaningfully. Restraining orders didn't stop him. Prior charges didn't stop him. And in the end, his unchecked aggression escalated into unspeakable horror. So what can we learn from this? First, we need to understand that abuse doesn't always look like bruises. It can start subtly. Manipulation, isolation, threats. Controlling behaviors often masquerade as concern. Victims may stay silent out of fear, shame, or hope that things will get better. But time and again, we've seen how emotional abuse can be a precursor to physical violence, and worse. If you see a friend, a family member, a neighbor going through something that seems off, don't look away. Ask questions, offer support. Create space for honesty without judgment. You don't have to be a professional to be a lifeline. Second, we have to hold our justice system accountable. In this case, Warren's criminal past was extensive. Meshay had filed for protection. There were warning signs, police reports, prior charges, including one for allegedly firing a weapon at Meshay's apartment just months before her murder. And yet, he was still walking free. There must be stronger systems in place to protect survivors and their children. Survivors should not have to live in fear while waiting for real consequences to catch up with abusers. No one should have to die to be believed. The role of community is also essential. The public support during the search for Meshay and Layla was powerful. But imagine if that level of concern had surrounded Meshay while she was still alive. We must build communities where survivors are heard, protected, and empowered to leave dangerous situations safely. The lives of Meshay and Layla were brutally cut short, but their story must live on, not just as a tragedy, but as a catalyst for awareness and change. We remember them not as victims, but as a mother and daughter who deserved a future, joy, and safety. And we commit, in their memory, to doing better, to listening, believing, and acting when it matters most. If you or someone you know is in an abusive relationship, please reach out for help. Share this video to raise awareness, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories that uncover not just what happened, but why it matters.